Everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice 8-game Major League Baseball slate. The slate does feature some tough games. We have a game in Colorado again between the Dodgers and the Rockies. So before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? All right, so just looking at the slate, I think there's a lot of good pitching on it. It's going to be pretty tough to choose the pitchers today. There's a lot of guys. There's really 8 pitchers that have pretty good ownership potential, and then we have a couple low-owned upside guys. But there's a lot of good pitching today. I do think it's going to be tougher to find great bats, but there's definitely a few because we do have some really bad pitchers on the slate as well. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm just going to run these down here with my best plays, and then so my top four is going to be Cole Reagans, Joe Ryan, uh, Garrett Crochet, and then Hunter Brown for Houston. So all four of these guys have GPP and cash game potentials, and even if you're going to utilize them for core plays. So talking about Reagan's first, now he's going to have the highest ownership on the slate. He's not got the best K rate on the slate, but he's got nice upside in a plus matchup and a decent K rate. He's also got a good matchup here against Oakland, and he's been good against Oakland in the past. In fact, this season he already had one game with 31 fantasy points. He gave up no earned runs and allowed 7 strikeouts. So I think he can do something similar to that. He's definitely a really solid option on the slate. As for Ryan from Minnesota, he does have an interestingly difficult matchup here against Tampa Bay, but he has been pretty good lately. He did struggle early in the season more, but he's really been good in 4 of the last 5 games, so he had one bad game. There's a little bit of risk here, but he's got a decent K rate as well. In fact, he's tied for the best K rate on the slate. He does have a low floor though, so that's the concern here. But he's still a good GPP or even a core play at the top at the P1 position, and he'll be a little bit more contrarian because he won't be the highest owned guy on the slate. Crochet for the Chicago White Sox has a tough matchup against Houston. Now I do think Houston has some bats that look decent, but he has had 8 straight games over 23 fantasy points. He's been extremely solid this season. He had a little tough part there after a few games, but since then he's been absolutely fantastic and hasn't really had any terribly bad games. He's also faced a very tough schedule. It's not like it's been super easy. So he definitely does draw good metrics here, and he's definitely worth a look as he's got the best K rate on the slate as well. Though Houston doesn't tend to be a huge strikeout team, but he's definitely in play here. Then we'll look at Houston's pitcher and Hunter Brown. Now he's cheap today, and that's pretty interesting here. He's been pretty good lately. He really did struggle early in the season, but his K rate is decent enough here to be an interesting option as a kind of a P2 option or a P1 even. He does have that GPP upside as well, and he's interesting here because of the matchup and the price at just $7,000. That makes him a very viable option on the slate. A couple other GPP plays we can look at. Peralta for Milwaukee. He has struggled more lately than we would like, but he does have decent strikeout rate and he's got a decent matchup here, so he's definitely a contrarian play or a GPP option. Garrett Cole is going to be coming back from injury. Today it looks like I don't know that he's going to pitch a ton of innings, so that's the concern here. He's also pretty pricey for that, but he does project to have decent ownership, so he can be a kind of Hail Mary approach there. And then also Gossman for Toronto. He does have a tougher matchup against Boston, and he's been kind of boom or bust lately, but he does have a low floor and high ceiling, so he's a risky play, but he's definitely somebody that's going to be interesting because of his price point at $8,300. And then Bradley for Tampa Bay. He definitely has GPP opportunity here. He's only had one bad game so far this season. He has, and Minnesota is an inconsistent team. He hadn't pitched a ton of games, but aside from the one Baltimore game, he's been fantastic. So he's definitely interesting on the slate, and so he's worth a look. But his K rate is lower than most of the other guys I already mentioned. 2 other guys that are kind of Hail Mary type plays, but low owned, but have some upside would be Bobby Miller for the Dodgers. Now, he hasn't pitched in a while, and he should be back from an injured list today. And so we have to be concerned that he could potentially be on a pitch limit. But with that said, he does have some upside as this game's in Colorado, though, so that's the concern. Manea for the Mets has a good matchup against Texas. Now, Texas can have big games, so he is a Hail Mary boomer bust play. He's got good upside, but he does struggle sometimes. He's been inconsistent, but he's cheap enough to be a Hail Mary play for some contrarian lineups and things like that. So let's go ahead and look at our bats now. So we do have an interesting slate for batters. Uh, Looking at catcher, our top overall plays are Will Smith being the number one guy. He's been pretty good so far this season. He's been somewhat inconsistent, but he does have good metrics for this game in Colorado, so he's definitely a great option here. William Contreras is also interesting today. Now his metrics are not quite as good. He's just a little bit cheaper than Will Smith, and he definitely draws good potential today. But his teammate Gary Sanchez is also in play. I'll actually mention him now. I think if both the guys play for the Brewers, I'm probably going to be more likely to use Sanchez than Contreras today, because he'll be more chalky. But Contreras is definitely going to be a GPP play on the slate. Jansen is in play for Toronto. He has some nice upside today as well. He's looked pretty good lately, more, even though he's kind of struggled some. He hadn't started every game, but if he plays today, he'll be somebody to consider. Alvarez for the Mets, his metrics are not that great today. He's really struggled so far, but he definitely has some potential in this one. And he's had a couple of straight games, finally, that he's starting to hit the ball well. And if he can continue that in this matchup, then that's definitely going to be a viable thing. Jonah Heim, also in play for Texas. The top owned guys at the catcher position will be Gary Sanchez, Will Smith, and Danny Jansen. And then the low owned upside guys are Alvarez for the Mets, Contreras for Milwaukee, Perez for Kansas City, and Yanir Diaz for Houston. But I do like Gary Sanchez a lot. That's probably my favorite play at this position right now. Looking at first base, Ohtani does jump off the page. He's been phenomenal in the series so far against the Colorado Rockies, and I look for him to continue that here today. He's back to $7,000, which is absolutely insane. But he has managed to pay off at this position. Freddie Freeman has been a little bit less consistent, but he still has some good potential today as he has home run upside, though he does need one to pay off here. Alonso also looks solid today. He's not cheaper than the two guys from the Dodgers, and he's also been extremely good the last few games, so he's definitely worth a look here with home run upside. Vlad Jr. also interesting for Toronto. He definitely draws some contrarian play today. His price point's a little bit cheaper, so that gives him some upside, but he's definitely risky on the slate. And then Rice Hoskins, he's probably my favorite player at this position. Where'd he go? Oh yeah, he's a core play for me for Milwaukee. He does he has been inconsistent, but he has home run metrics today. He's one of the best metrics players on this entire slate. I'm also going to mention he'll be the top owned player on the slate, probably behind Ohtani and Freddie Freeman, so to keep that in mind. A couple of low-owned upside guys that you could consider are Isaac Paredes for Tampa Bay. Extreme one-off play right there. Pete Alonso looks solid today. Like I said, Pasquanto for Kansas City, Yanir Diaz for Tampa Bay, and Vlad Jr. for Toronto all have some nice low-owned upside potential. Looking at second base here, Marcus Semien jumps off the page as the top overall play at this position. He's going to be hard to roster at this price point, but he's definitely worth a look today. I think it depends on how you do pitching, if you can mix in some of these more expensive plays, but he's cheaper than some of the others, so he's definitely worth a look. Gavin Lux for the Dodgers is kind of an interesting play today. In fact, the Dodgers have a lot of interesting plays today, being this game's in Colorado. Now, he did have a pretty good game in his first game there. He didn't start the second one, but he is interesting on the slate. Jose Altuve is kind of a contrarian option for Houston, though he has home run upside. He's definitely high risk, high reward right now, his price point and how he's been batting. And then Gleyber Torres, he might be a kind of sneaky play here for the Yankees, as he does draw good metrics for this game. So I do think he's a viable option today. But the top owned plays on the slate will probably be Adam Frazier for Kansas City, Gavin Lux for the Dodgers, and Spencer Horwitz for Toronto. I think a lot of people will have to pay down at this position to help pay up at other positions, especially if you want to mix in some of the Dodgers batters on the slate again. Looking at third base, the other low-owned options for this position are going to be Miguel Rojas for the Dodgers, Brandon Lowe for Tampa Bay, Jose Caballera for Tampa Bay, and Jose Altuve. So the thing about Tampa Bay is they definitely don't project particularly well, but they do have some upside, as a lot of their guys look really solid on paper today. As for the Dodgers, you can go cheap with some Dodgers players and help pay up at other positions for other players that you want, like Ohtani, for instance. Looking at third base, Royce Lewis does jump off the page as the best overall play at this position. He's been absolutely insane so far this season. Hard to ignore that, his play. He didn't do well in the last game against Tampa Bay, but I look for him to have a solid game here. Rafael Devers is a contrarian play today. He doesn't have the best matchup metrics, but he's hitting the ball pretty well right now, so he's definitely worth a look. A couple of value plays at this position is Ventos for the Mets. He has been really solid the last couple games. He's been looking pretty good on the metrics in the last series, or in this series against Texas, and he has played well as a result. I think he does have some good home run upside today as well. And then McMahon uh, for for Colorado is a good one-off for Colorado. He's the best player right now on Colorado. He's been hitting the ball pretty well. If he draws a start today, he'll be somebody I would consider a lot. A couple top owned plays here at this position. Kevin Biggio for the Dodgers. He's a nice cheap play. He's been pretty good in the last few games, so he's definitely worth a look here since he's joined the Dodgers. Looking at Barger for Toronto, he's a dirt cheap play that can have some upside. I think that people are going to go pretty cheap at this position as well based on the ownership situation. Joey Ortiz for Milwaukee, also interesting, as is Ezekiel Duran for Texas as a top owned option as well. Some low owned upside guys: Isaac Paredes of Tampa Bay, Miguel Rojas for the Dodgers, Ventos for the Mets. I think he's probably going to be the sneaky play for this position. Rafael Devers for Boston, Garcia for Kansas City, and then Kiner Falefa for Toronto. Alex Bregman does have some upside as well, but he's definitely high risk on this one. Looking at our shortstops, we do have some shortstops we like today. Francisco Lindor jumps off the page as the top overall guy. He's really been solid lately. Where'd he go? Oh yeah, he's a core play. Sorry. He's been pretty solid lately with some big games. He has some inconsistencies throughout the season, but he does tend to score decent fantasy points when he does have a good game, and he's definitely worth a look today. Bobby Witt Jr. is super expensive today. Going to be extremely hard to roster, but he's got a favorable matchup here, and he's been somewhat been robust lately, so he's definitely a contrarian play. Gunnar Henderson also looks really solid for Baltimore today, and despite being a tougher matchup, I don't know how long Cole's going to go, so I think he's going to have some utility coming up against the bullpen at least. And then Volpe for the Yankees, he's an interesting play today. He's been inconsistent this season as well, but he does draw good metrics on the slate. Jeremy Pena is also in play for Houston as one of the better value plays at this position. This position is somewhat hard to find good values, so I think he's probably my favorite option from that perspective. Looking at the top ownership options, Francisco Lindor, Ezekiel Duran for Texas, and Willy Adames uh, for Milwaukee also has some nice upside now. Sorry, I had the price wrong on here for Duran. He's just $2,800, so it'd be a good, interesting play from a chalky perspective. Some low-end upside guys: Bobby Witt Jr., Jose Caballero, David Hamilton for Boston, Kiner Falefa for Toronto, Corey Seager for Texas, and Paul DeJong for the Chicago White Sox, as well as Jeremy Pena. Looking at outfielders, I'm just going to move over here to our thing here, so show you these. So we're going to start with Ohtani, Toscar Hernandez, Luis Robert, Juan Soto, and Jordan Alvarez, all looking really solid today. I really do like Ohtani and Toscar Hernandez a ton. I think that Robert, Soto, and Jordan Alvarez are kind of contrarian today. They don't really have the best metrics as you typically see from these guys, but they definitely are the best on the slate. Looking at Starling Marte, Jason Hayward, and Brandon Nemo, all three of these guys really jump off the pages a lot. I really like Marte and Hayward the best of these four, but I think all four of these guys have some utility. Pham is definitely a contrarian play for the White Sox. The top overall play, a couple other guys that are contrarian, Giancarlo Stanton, Dalton Varsho, Aldallis Garcia, who's just a little bit too cheap today. Andy Pages, JD Martinez, Robbie Grossman, and Harrison Bader all have some nice utility today. The top ownership options are going to be Kevin Biggio for the Dodgers, Ohtani, obviously, Aston Barger for Toronto, Frazier for Kansas City, and Robbie Grossman for Texas. I think people are going to try to find cheap options in this outfield, and that's definitely possible. A couple other guys to consider, though, as top ownership at Andy Pages, Jason Hayward, and JD Martinez. I think Jason Hayward is going to be high owned. He's definitely a risky play, but he also looks good, so it's hard to ignore him here. Some low ownership upside guys: Toscar Hernandez, Kyle Isbell, Dalton Varsho, Jose Siri, Randy Arozarena, and then Nelson Velasquez, MJ Melendez, and Josh Lowe. A couple other guys to consider: Jordan Alvarez, Aldallis Garcia. Garcia is just too cheap. Chorio for Milwaukee, and Nemo for the Mets. Let's look at our stacks here. So we do like the Dodgers, the Yankees, and Milwaukee are the best stacks. Now you notice that I've done this a little bit different. Now I'm just picking the players that have nice big time upside for these stacks, and so some of these stacks don't have 5 players. A couple of them actually have more than 5 players, but I'm just trying to put in there the guys that have the most potential today. So for the Dodgers, Otani, Toscar, Smith, Freeman, and Pages. But honestly, a lot of guys on the Dodgers look good today. For the Yankees, Soto, Stanton, and Verdugo jump out as top overall plays. Milwaukee, Hoskins, Adames, and then catcher Yelich and Ortiz. I think that's a really solid stack in general, and I think putting Sanchez there is fine today. For Colorado, McMahon, Stallings, and Toglia. If you think Colorado can do stuff, then those three are going to have the most upside here. For Texas, this is kind of a tough stack, to be honest, but Texas has some good guys with Seager, Simeon, and Garcia. For the Mets, there's a bunch of dudes for the Mets that look good today. I think they're a very good team to stack up with Martinez, Nemo, Ventos, Lindor, Marte, Iglesias, and Alonso. Now you can do that in a lot of different ways. Kind of the same goes for Kansas City. They look pretty good today with Witt Jr., Pasquanto, Perez, Garcia, Velasquez, and Melendez. For Toronto, Vlad Jr., Jansen, Turner, and Springer is a nice four-player stack. For Minnesota, Lewis, Larnach, Correa, and Castro look like a good four-player stack. And then these bottom teams, these are the teams that we're definitely going to try to focus our pitchers on, but there's definitely these Houston, Boston, at least, do look decent, though they're kind of risky because they don't have a lot of guys that have a lot of upside. For the Angels and Baltimore, I do think both these teams look really solid, and so they're definitely worth a look, but they definitely have a risky situation there. The White Sox do have a few guys that have nice upside today, so that's definitely interesting. Tampa Bay, uh, they project a lot better than what they look like on paper, at least, so we'll have to wait and see what they do in this game, but they could be a sneaky slate team right there, and then Oakland is got a couple guys that have some home run potential, but I don't expect Oakland to do much today. So with that said, guys,